Coach Williams, welcome to the basketball podcast.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So, I was saying before I heard about your name when you're the head coach of the Go-Go, and let's start there. Talk about it. Experience very early on in your coaching career to be able to be a head coach after being an assistant coach.
I was very fortunate. I was only 25 years old when I got hired to be the head coach. Before that, I had done 3 years of player development for the Wizards, and I couldn't have asked for a better learning experience and just being thrown in the fire to a completely unknown territory. At the time, I had no aspirations to be a head coach, and Tommy Shepard, our GM at the time, said, "Mike, you're going to do this job." And I was like, "All right." And I wouldn't trade it for the world. You just make mistakes, you learn from them, you apply it the next time. And I also had a really great group of people around, from the players to the staff to Amber Nichols, our GM. It was like a community thing. We're all just figuring it out, right? And that's the beauty of the G League. Everybody's in that same mode, just trying to learn and get better and improve and make to that next level. So I was really fortunate to have that experience.
What was one of your biggest challenges becoming a new head coach?
I think one of the biggest challenges was adjusting from being a player development coach, where everything you do is told to you by somebody else, more senior, to having to make decisions on a daily basis that affect not only you, but the entire group around you. And so, assuming a leadership position like that was definitely something I had to adjust to because I just had never really done it at that scale before. And I didn't take it lightly that we had so many young players on our team, and in large part, I was responsible for helping them start their careers the right way or get to where they wanted to go. And so making sure that everything was well thought out and done with some real intention was definitely something I had to adjust to. But again, like just having that responsibility and being able to be in the fire was awesome.
Well, it's tremendous, and that's a great blueprint because I think there's many assistant coaches that wish they could get that opportunity in some sense at some level just to be a head coach, especially if you followed your playing career right into a coaching career. And it's just awesome. And I know the topic that we're going to talk about today is something that you're passionate about, and I loved it. When you suggested it, I was like, we haven't really done a podcast on this topic alone, so this is going to be awesome. Talk to us about after action concepts and maybe just frame for us initially, what do you mean by that?
So when I say after action, I'm defining it as the play after the play, right? So we all have set plays. You run delay or stagger or whatever it is, and the play doesn't work. After action is what your players do next to try to create an advantage for the offense. And so there's a ton of things. Traditionally, what you see a lot in the NBA is spread pick and roll, right? Point guard has the ball in the middle of the floor or on the slot, and the five comes up to set. That's good if you have the personnel to execute it, right? If you have a Luka Doncic or a Trey Young or whoever else who's really going to pick and roll, that's great. But for other teams, playing 1-5 pick and roll isn't always the best tool, right? Sometimes it's small pick and roll, right? Most teams switch 1 through 4. So maybe you're setting a pick and roll with another guard or a wing. Maybe you have a wing who's really good against switches, so you can get the pick and roll the switch down. I think that's probably the second most popular. And there's other options. There's off-ball actions, which we love and we try to preach to our team, setting random pin downs and random flares just to create some indecision and confusion for the defense so you can create that next advantage and try to score within your flow.
Help us understand maybe before we dive deeper then the concept of practicing this. Because again, to a certain extent, you have to manipulate your offense to ensure that you're not scoring off these early advantages to even get to these realisms that you have in the game. So talk to us a little bit about that.
I think when you're trying to work on these things, you have to give the players a couple of frameworks of what they can do, right? Because if you don't really explain what they can do, they'll just always revert to what they know, right? And most players just know either ISO, which if you have great ISO players, great, but if you don't, you're going to be in a really tough spot, or they go to 1-5 pick and roll. And so you have to show them where they can set an off-ball screen to maybe create a shot for a teammate, or help them recognize that maybe they have a bad defender on them and they can go set a pick and roll for the guard. And then what do you do in that pick and roll, right? We call it a sprint slip. Do you go screen out and pop, right, and get behind the three-point line, or do you hit under? And we say hit under, we call that a small rolling versus switch. So you get to that back pocket of the on-ball defender, and then you don't let them switch underneath you, and then you roll, and then can you get that pass over the top or on a bounce pass to a rolling wing or a rolling guard who can then make a play in the pocket as your five would do versus like a drop or like an X out or something like that.
This connects very well with more modern offense, which is more conceptual, because the large more majority of the game happens in these unstructured moments. So just
Mhm.
connect that a little bit for us in terms of, do we have percentages on how many possessions of a game end up being these play after the play type of situations?
I don't have an exact percentage on how often it happens, but it's a large part of the game. It's not also just after set plays. It's also in transition, right? Maybe you pushed it hard and you didn't quite score early in the clock, but your spacing is not in a way where you can actually run one of your plays. Okay, how do we get to the next thing? And a lot of times it's more about the speed at which you do it, more so than what you're actually doing, right? Because what you don't want, especially with a 24-second shot clock, you don't want players just holding the ball and wasting precious time off the clock. And then it gets desperation time, and then it's even harder to create a good shot, right? So if we get to that transition and we don't have anything, or we run that first play and we don't have anything, the faster players can recognize that they have to create something and go screen or go move or sometimes even just pass the ball across the floor, right? Like I'm sure we've all seen 2 or 3 years ago, whatever it was, Draymond Green talked about the power of the swing pass, right? Sometimes just passing the ball across the floor and letting a teammate attack a closeout is really important. But again, the speed at which you do it is really important. And the faster you recognize it, hopefully the defense is a little bit behind and then you get to that next play.
I call those lags. Like, I
Mm,
don't know what you guys call them, but lags. And it's a really hard thing to remove from the game. Even you get scored on and getting the ball back inbounds. Those are lags, and getting up the floor and then having a lag before you flow into something. And again, that's one of the reasons I think you frame this, and I hope coaches will think about that, moving away from just the high ball screen,
right.
which tends to be like a lag a lot of times because you're waiting for the ball screen to come and the dribble is just dribbling. Talk to us about, again, some of these other ways that we can remove these lags, whether it's through practice, emphasis, or different types of actions.
So I think obviously just some tactical things that we can do in practice. I think you try to mimic or represent the after action spacings that you may have. So for us, a lot of our after action ends in some type of four out spacing where we have both corners filled, the ball's probably on either wing, and then the five is somewhere on the baseline, right? So we can just start there. And from there, we use a lot of different constraints, right? Maybe we'll start the ball with one player on the wing, and we'll say to start this action, you have to pass either direction, right? So you can pass it to the corner or you can pass it across the floor. And then that triggers the next thing, right? And then we say, right now we're playing just off ball. And usually we do this with all defense, right? So if we start the ball on the wing and we pass it to either one, right now we're playing off ball. You either go screen or somebody comes screens for you after the pass, right? And you just show them different opportunities, and but they figure it out on their own, right? You create a framework for them, and then within those constraints, they can explore what's possible. And then you build it up. Okay, now we can play small pick and roll. Okay, so we call it like pass and chase. So after you pass, go chase your pass and go screen for the ball. And then you can hit under, you can sprint slip, and we play from there. And usually these games are done with like short shot clocks, right? We're assuming there's 13, 12, 10, something like that on the shot clock. And then you just create these different kind of modes where it's clean, but the players don't know exactly what's coming. And then as your team gets a little bit better at it and you want to make it a little bit messier, then you can start with some kind of funky spacings where it's not just clean corner and clean wings. Maybe you start two or three guys inside the 3-point line in random spots, and then they space out, and then you got to go play and find action like that. Or maybe you do it where more than that. Maybe you have all five players in the paint and they're like rotating in a circle. Then they all just branch out to random places and then they got to figure out, okay, which teammates on my left, which teammates on my right, what are their skill sets? Okay, and then what makes sense for after action here? Because a big part of after action is understanding, like for the players, you have to understand your ability, your teammate's ability that's near you, right? And then who's defending you and your teammate, right? If we're playing Oklahoma City, not that we can't score on Lou Dort, but we're not going to bring Lou Dort into a small pick and roll, knowing that he's probably the best defender on the floor, right? So maybe, and not to, I won't throw out any names, but like we'll probably go to somewhere else. Also, right? If we're playing four out, and let's say our four just happens to be at the top of the key, right? And he's not a great pick and roll player or a great ball handler, we're probably not going to pass and chase to him. Instead, we would play something called like touch game, which is get game or hidden hand back, right? Where maybe we pass to the four Instead of setting the screen for him, we come back and get the ball. And now he can be a screener because that works more with his skill set than him being a ball handler that doesn't. And so you just work through all these different relationships. And sometimes it's 5-on-5, it can be 2-on-2, 3-on-3. And you just put guys in all these different areas and they can explore what works for them and what doesn't.
I love so much of the phrasing. You meant calling these relationships. I love that idea. These are relationships and go a little deeper and the funky spacing I'm going to come back to because I love that as well. But go a little deeper then on these relationships and how do you help players identify when there's an advantage versus when they don't have an advantage? As you said, the difference between the chase and set the screen versus the obviously the action where we don't want them involved, touch and go.
Sure. A lot of it comes down to, I'm sure everybody's heard this before. You talk about like point 0.5 basketball, right? So you're going to understand if you have an advantage very quickly to whether shoot or drive based off of where the defender's closing out to you from. A lot of times you lose the point 0.5 advantage if you just catch and hold the ball, right? So once you realize that there's nothing going on, like the defender's basically square to you. They're right in front. You don't have an angle. He's not on your side. He's not even on your side. The play, like the advantage is pretty much dead from there, unless you're going to back out an ISO and try to like shake him up a little bit. Okay, so that's one of the first pieces. The second piece to recognize it is sometimes if you just find yourself staring and everybody else is staring around you, you probably got to go do something, right? Like we always say, no stares, right? So if the ball handler is just staring, looking at you, waiting for you to do something, or you're staring and you're just watching them dribble, go make something happen. And then in terms of the relationships, I think a lot of it comes down to what you do in your player development sections, right? So much of player development is one-on-one, 1-on-0. You have your basket and your coaches, and you kind of just do your own thing. But I think a lot of teams or a lot of people are starting to adjust to doing more group work, and you can manipulate the groups based off of certain things that happen in the game. So for us, maybe Keontae George needs to work with Kyle Filipowski on their switching pick and roll. Okay. Or we have an off-ball player who's a really great shooter, but we see sometimes that teams switch the off-ball action or they maintain. Right. So we'll do some guard stuff where we're setting off ball and we go through different coverages where they're switching. What do you do versus switching? How can we play against that? Where they're maintaining. Okay, now we got to be a little bit more physical and try to really get a hit. And so I think for coaches, I want this to be applicable to other people, right? Like you got to try to manufacture some of this time, whether it's 10 minutes or if you have 20 minutes on a practice day or whatever, try to just take players through these actions. And then obviously film is a big part of it too, right? And showing them what exactly it looks like when it's done well, and then when it's done poorly and things are stagnant and stuck.
Particularly at the NBA level where you don't get as much practice time, right? In theory, at college, high school level, you have more practice time. You should be able to do some of these things on court. So I love that you referenced that. And the funky spacing, let's talk about that a little bit more because this is where spacing has become. It's like sometimes imperfect spacing actually creates more space. So it's
Mhm.
not we always used to say fix it, but you're referencing the fact that sometimes we don't want to fix it and we just want to figure it out relative to that imperfect spacing.
I think we saw a lot of it with Indiana in the playoffs this year, right? And they just play so fast and they move so much. And it's not like your clean picture where the corners are filled and there's two guys in the wing. You have one guy on the block, another guy on the elbow, and another guy on the other block. But because they're moving and they're going so fast, they still create pretty good looks. Okay, now obviously there's a lot of times where you need to get out to create space. Okay, but in practice, we can manufacture some of these environments where maybe we start this drill where the ball is on the interior. I think a lot of times when we're playing like half court offense in practice, we start with the ball just coming down from half court, right? But if we're working on after action, maybe a player drove it off the initial play. Let's say we're on like a pin down and the player tried to turn the corner off we call it quick. So he turned the corner off of quick and he didn't have anything. Okay. He's stuck basically on the lane line, right? There's a defender in front of him. His screener probably rolled. So now you have two guys automatically inside the interior. And then for us, we always three-way slash. So if there's three guys in a row and there's a curl on a quick, the middle guy's cutting. Okay, so we have the ball stuck, we have a roller, and we have another player who cut, thinking that maybe he was going to get open or create an advantage for his teammate behind him. So why not create that environment in our practice where we start from that area with three guys there, one on the lane line, blocking another cutter, probably on the baseline somewhere. Okay, pass out and then figure it out. Okay. And now we're playing in these kind of weird gray areas that sometimes happen quickly, but sometimes they don't. And then we can flow and play after action from there. And it doesn't have to be just that. It can be, this is where kind of coaches can be creative. You can create some really weird spacings, and maybe the players won't exactly see it during the game, but by creating these situations that are a little bit challenging and difficult, I think you help your players become more flexible and robust during the games. So when they do see certain situations that they quite haven't exactly practiced, they still have solutions to how to fix it and how to get to the next thing. And I think that's really what it comes down to with after action is basically how to play the game, right? We create sets, but they keep you organized. But playing the game is random, it's fluid, it's free flowing, right? And you're not always going to have this perfect mix. And so you can have these funky spacings in your practices, 5-on-5, 4-on-4, even 3-on-3. I would say if you're going to do 3-on-3 or 2-on-2, I always think you should probably shrink the floor a little bit, right? Because you have to try to imagine that there's other players in the other spots. So maybe it's you cut off a third of the floor, and we're playing from one sideline to the opposite lane line instead of sideline to sideline. And now players have to work in more confined space to help them understand these different scenarios.
I love you bringing up shrink the floor. It's something that I've used for a long time as a constraint. Just they have to play inside of the coach, for
Mhm.
example, and then the coach within even possessions can manipulate where they are so they understand they have more or less space, which makes them situationally more aware. So that's such a great point of all these great points. I love talking about this. Let's maybe go to, I'm not going to use any of your players, but let's say the difference between, say, a Cam Thomas or a Jalen Pickett. So someone who could create their own advantage versus someone who couldn't create their own advantage. How do we help those players in terms of identifying what's best for them?
I think the first piece is being honest with them. If we're talking to Cams, okay, I know you can score. You averaged 25 a game almost
He
last year,
knows he can score.
and he knows he can score. Okay, and so we tell that to him, and we tell it to his teammates. None of this is black and white. For a guy like Cam Thomas or last year on our team, maybe Jordan Clarkson, right? We're going to give those guys a little bit more leeway to just dance a little bit because we know they're so talented at doing that that it actually could be the best thing we create for our team. Okay. But in your example, like if you're talking to Jalen Pickett and you catch the ball, we're probably not ISOing. So for Jalen, we're going to give you some other solutions, right? Maybe you can go play DHO or pass and chase, right? And we give those same solutions to Cam Thomas as well, right? It's not like it's just one or the other. Like everybody learns them, everybody knows them, but I'm gonna treat you fairly, but we're also gonna play within what your skill set is. And I think for a guy like Cam Thomas who can really score, those are the players you have to help them pick and choose their spots, right? For Cam, if we're pushing the transition, he has the ball, and he doesn't have anything, but there's 17 seconds on the shot clock, we got to get to some more movement, unless you already have an advantage. But if we got to stop, we probably don't, right? But if there's 8 seconds or 9 seconds on the shot clock, okay, it's time to get busy, right? We got to, for lack of a better phrase, get in our bag, right? You got to make something happen. Okay. But if there's 9 seconds for a player who doesn't have that same ISO capability, right, it's still a lot of time. Right. So now you can play that pass and chase, you can go screen, play off ball. Like a lot of it's based off of us being honest to the players. And a lot of it, honestly, like the players have to be honest with themselves too, right? Like, especially in the NBA game. And I learned this coaching in the G League. As a coach, you really don't have that much control during the game. I think we've all experienced that at different levels. And so you have to trust that the players are going to do what they know they can do. And I think that's a big part of it as well.
Love that. The honesty is such a powerful part of that. And you mentioned random pin downs and you love random flares. So
Mhm.
talk to us about how you can help players create those relationships and understanding that's something that should happen or could happen in this situation.
When your offense stalls out, right, the defense also stalls out as well, right? So if you're just watching and standing, they're just standing, but they're not totally aware of what's going on. And a lot of defense, or most of defense, is reacting to the offense, right? They're always not so aware. So if you set a random pin down and the guy who's defending the corner is just looking around, or maybe he's in help, right? He's going to be late, right? He's going to be off the body. He's not going to be in the proper position to effectively guard that off-ball action. And so just setting a random pin down for a guy that's not looking is probably going to generate an open shot. And if you're setting it for a good shooter, a lot of times because guys are late, they try to go under screens. And now you just pin them in and you get a wide open shot. That same thing applies, and I think it's even harder when you're setting like a random flare or a rip, right? So maybe the ball's on the, let's say the ball's on the left wing, and you have a guy on the right wing, right corner, five's on the baseline, and then obviously the other corner's filled, right? If the guy from the corner comes up and sets a flare or a rip or whatever you want to call it, that's even harder to guard because players don't recognize that as quickly, right? Now the screen's coming from the baseline, they have to talk that out. And the more actions that teams have to defend, usually the more they mess up. And so we've already ran one action, and maybe we move the ball side to side, and then we run another random pin down. It's going to be really hard to defend that. And it doesn't have to be small. If you get to that 4 out spacing, the five can also come from the baseline instead of back screen too. Or the five can come set a flare, right? It doesn't have to always be small, small. So these random off ball actions, I think, are more unpredictable because players have just seen them a little bit less. But they expect to run small pick and roll. They expect to run 1-5 pick and roll. They don't expect you to go pin in. They don't expect you to maybe even screen your own and push him into another guy, and then the guy comes up and gets a shot. Right. So it's just about the element of surprise that I think makes it really useful.
And balancing that, I imagine, especially teaching it at younger levels, balancing that with holding space because we
Right.
don't always have to have an off the ball action, do we?
If a player's already driving the ball, maybe you have an advantage. If a player's already driving the ball, sometimes you just hold and let the defense make your decision for you. Right. If nobody comes over and help, you go score. If there's two on the ball, they come and crack down on the big, you try to find the corner. Right. But if there's nothing going on, then we have to move and we have to generate something. And I think that's not just lower levels, honestly. I think that's the NBA as well, where a lot of younger players come into the league thinking they have to move to get involved in the action. And they don't realize the power and the value of just holding the corner, right? A lot of times the ball will find you in the corner if you just stay there. Now, I'm not advocating for you to just be a robot and a statue and just not move at all. You have to get into the vision of the ball, right? But starting in the corner and then moving appropriately based off of where the help is and where the ball is actually a really valuable place to be because you're probably going to get a shot. So there's things like that.
I can picture it because I can picture sometimes, and especially at all levels, dribble handoffs where the player receiving is already running to the ball, but
Mhm.
meanwhile their defender already ran to the ball. So if they just held their spot, they're open.
Exactly.
Easier said than done, I know, in terms of teaching that, but that's the relationship part of it you're trying to build between both of those players. And really a big part of this is for me, these actions and these different types of philosophies that you're coaching, you've already connected for it, but after action concepts are essentially just conceptual offense, some capacity. So you don't have to run a set, say out of transition. You can flow from this to this, and it looks like the same thing.
100%. And the players are organized. They know exactly what to do. And from there, they just play basketball, right? And I think it actually frees up the players to just play their games, right? Because they don't have to push the ball, bring it back out, and then get into the right spots. They just play the game as if you were playing pickup and you just have five random guys who just happen to be at the gym or the park at the same time, and you just try to organize yourselves. It's sort of similar. It's really not that different.
Love it. Talk to us about hunting matchups. So again, we're inundated with it in the NBA playoffs. We hear, okay, it's just a question of everyone's just going to hunt the weakest defender and attack the weakest defender. We get that as a primary responsibility. Talk to us about how that fits in deeper at this level of these after actions.
I will say, in my opinion, I feel like hunting the matchup is overall, I think it's actually gone a little bit too far to the point where it just like
I would agree.
stalls out your offense and you're working so hard to try to find a bad defender that you just waste time and you end up getting a bad shot anyway. So I just want to start off with that because I think it's gone a little bit too far. But in after action, let's go back to this transition scenario. Obviously, one of the rules in transition defense is like you don't have your man, you have a man. So if we're pushing and we have a matchup where our four man's being guarded by a small point guard, okay, we're hunting that matchup. We're going to try to like for last year we had John Collins or this year Lowry Markkinen, right? If those guys are going to have a small on them, we got to find them in the post, right? I think that's pretty simple and pretty basic. But after a set play, and we're getting after action, from there it's about recognizing what's possible, right? So if a bad defender is one pass away from the ball, okay, let's try to bring that guy into it. That makes sense. Okay. But now if the bad defender is all the way on the opposite side of the floor, guarding the corner, okay, we're not going to sprint him up into a pick and roll because they're just going to basically pre-switch it. Okay, so let's go set an off-ball screen, right? And that's another way to hunt a matchup. Hunting a matchup is not just for isolations. It's not just for rolling a guy to the post or bringing him into small pick and roll. Usually, if a bad defender, if a guy can't guard the ball, he usually can't really guard off ball either, right? And so if we put that guy in off ball and maybe he's a little bit lazy, we can create a shot like that, right? Maybe he like tries to point switch and we get a stop behind three off a pin down. Or we go set the screen and they switch and now we can duck him in because he switched onto a bigger guy. And so I think we have to expand our definition of what hunting a matchup really means because it's not just isolation. Sometimes hunting a matchup is even knowing that the bad defender's on the weak side corner and we can make him the low man in a 1-5 pick and roll, right? And so let's say ball's on the left slot, we come and set a step up. If that bad defender's already over there, this is perfect, okay? Because now we have either a bad defender or a small defender who's going to be trying to stop our 5-man rolling to the rim, and now we have another advantage. Okay, and these things do not come very easily. I know we're talking conceptually right now. They take a lot of work to help players recognize them. And everybody's not going to recognize them. That's the reality of it. Okay. But I still think it's worth helping the players understand that because the more they know and the more they understand, the more they can execute and effectively play the game. And it makes the game just a little bit easier for them.
And as you referenced, you don't want them to stop and think about it. You want them to flow and play. But can you just frame it for us? Because there are certain times in the game that the game does slow down where it's not point 0.5. For example, we're in a ball screen action and we're making decisions about drawing two or not out of that. What are some other examples of that, particularly to maybe help us with the pin down and the flare? Because you see this all the time at high school levels and everywhere in AAU. They're running this great action and somebody actually gets open, but the ball didn't slow down to be able to read that action that was happening.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like everybody, we all preach point 0.5, point 0.5, point 0.5, but sometimes patience really is the best thing. I would say on these pin downs and these flares, they only happen once the team recognizes that they can't attack a closeout, right? So if the ball changes size of the floor and the player who caught it can't attack downhill or can't shoot it, okay, now that kind of triggers and initiates that off-ball action, that pin down or that flare, right? We kind of talked about this earlier with the lower levels of being patient, right? If the guy caught it and attacked off the closeout, we're probably going to just hold our space, right? But if he caught it and he couldn't attack and he couldn't shoot, now's a great time to recognize that we can go set an off-ball screen. And then from there, you have other things you can do, right? Maybe the off-ball screen doesn't work, but we're already moving. And now the guy who came off the off-ball screen goes into a pick and roll, right? But the guy who had the ball isn't technically playing point 0.5. He has to wait for the off-ball action to develop, right? So maybe he can pass to the guy coming off the screen. If not, then the guy coming off the screen can come into a pick and roll. And then that player with the ball is waiting just a little bit longer for that pick and roll action to develop. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of what you're saying, and I love the phrasing, I love the logic behind it. It is a simplicity to it, even though we can complicate it as coaches. For the players, it's not that complicated because it's just them understanding, as you've referenced many times, the relationships and obviously time and score and the different situations that come into it. But I do want you to come back and highlight because you've referenced attack and closeouts a few times. And I do think this is an underutilized strategy, is that sometimes when you get stuck, just moving the ball and giving your players time to figure out, say, a closeout to attack is a huge part of it. We don't always have to run an action, do we?
No, we don't. When the ball moves, the defense moves, right? And when the defense moves and they have to guard the ball, you have a closeout. And closeouts to me are the most difficult thing to defend in the NBA and really at all levels. And it actually makes players who aren't as skilled way more effective and way more valuable if they do attack quickly, right? Maybe you don't have the ability to play in pick and roll or to dance with the ball and create an isolation situation, but pretty much everybody can catch and go or go and catch, whatever you want to call it, right? Pretty much everybody can rip that thing down the slot or rip it down the middle and then make a decision from there, right? Now everybody can't catch and shoot, but that's also one of the first reads as well, right? And so simply passing the ball. Now we don't want to just like We don't want to be like the scout team in practice and just moving the ball around in shell drill, right? But we want to pass and then just see if that guy can attack closeout first. And then off that closeout, if the guy gets stopped, then we have solutions for that, right? Like for us, we have this kind of dribble handoff concept where if we catch the ball and try to drive it and we get cut off, we just go play DHL to the corner. Now we're already in a really good position because we're inside the 3-point line, we're a little bit lower. We're probably going to be dribbling at the defender who's also inside the 3-point line, and it creates an opportunity for the guy in the corner to maybe get a shot or drive or attack a switch or whatever. Right. And so that simple swing pass and moving the ball around shifts the defense and just loosens them up a little bit. Okay. And then from there, we can attack the closeout and try to see what else we can create from there.
That example of the handoff situation after a drive, phrase it to kids all the time because again, they just keep running exchanges, handoffs, but I'm like, really a handoff is a drive that is stopped in the ideal situation, right? That there's that intent to drive first towards the rim and then turn a drive into a handoff. So again, I'm just great that you're highlighting that concept. That's so powerful. Can you talk to us a little bit about your drive system, your penetration reaction system? Is it a set system that, okay, if this happens, or are we allowing players some freedom of decision making, particularly in terms of empowering them to cut off the ball in these after actions?
Yeah. I think a lot of it is personnel driven. So there's some freedom within that based off your skill set. So if we're playing a lineup where our four can't really shoot, the players on the floor will know that he's probably going to look to cut from the perimeter. So maybe there's a slot drive and the five's working the dunker, but our four-man who can't shoot is also in that weak side corner. We'll know that, okay, this guy might be looking to cut. And if he cuts, then the guy next to him has to fill his place in the corner so that there's another outlet. So I don't, in terms of a drive and replace kind of system, I think we have certain concepts and rules with the cutting, right? Like for us, again, that we talk about that three away slash where that middle guy's cutting. Anytime the ball is penetrated from, I guess, the strong side and you're on the weak side, that three-way guy's always going. We have some pick and roll cuts that are pretty standard too. A lot of teams now are doing the slide, right? Where if the pick and roll is going to the double side, the corner guy is cutting. For us, that's a call. We'll add a term that means that to the play call. But we also will, for us, like we will cut that wing guy. So that's really like that's like a read. So if the ball is going to the double side, that wing guy is cutting, and that's like you're supposed to do that more often than not. But it's a read. If you're a defender at the nail, it's totally hugged up to you, and the nail's open, it doesn't really make sense to cut, right? But if he's really at the nail, then you can cut and cleanse the nail almost, and then you put that corner guy in a really bad position to have to make a decision. So we have a few rules like that, a few things, but really it's just more flow and just find the open space to make sure we're in spots. So when a guy has a drive, he has outlets if he gets cut off or the help comes.
Love it. Again, it's all about teaching players how to play and make the decision. And even if they make the wrong decision, in your opinion, the teammates can make it a right decision, can't they? And that is a part of this after action part of it that we can always make it right.
I think it's funny when teaching this, a lot of times players stop because they think, oh, I did it wrong, or this doesn't seem right. And there's really no right or wrong answer. You're just trying to create a good shot. So if you do something that okay, you drove and you got cut off, or you went to screen and we didn't have anything, okay, you tried it. If it didn't work, you just get to the next thing. If you have enough time. Obviously, if you don't have enough time, you just shoot it. But there's nothing right or wrong about it. You just got to keep moving and keep flowing. And I think that's what I really learned and appreciated from the Pacers during the season, but definitely in the playoffs. They didn't really always play with just conventional offense or spacing. It wasn't anything that you would determine as like textbook classic right. They just played and moved and fed off each other, and they got really good shots, and they almost won a championship. So
It's
I think like
beautiful. Yeah.
it was
Particularly the ball movement, right? Didn't that stand out as that early hit or that early kick or that early, like it was just a willingness to get off the ball much faster than I think we're traditionally used to watching with some NBA teams.
but they have some players who aren't as talented as other guys who were really effective in the series, right? Neesmith was awesome, right? But a lot of the way he played was just really attacking closeouts. And if he didn't have anything, he would pass and chase the Halliburton or Siakam, and then they would just play from there. Same thing with Obi Toppin, right? They don't, Obi has game, but it wasn't like he was just ISOing all over the place. If he didn't have anything, he just passed and chased, and they got to the next thing. And you're right, the willingness to get off the ball and pass is probably an even bigger issue in terms of offense. But when done really well, it can lead to some really cool things.
And it's a hard thing to navigate, especially at your level, because players have confidence they can make the play and make the shot, which is also a good thing as well. So sometimes getting off the ball in their mind is not the best decision because they think they're the best decision. And
Yeah.
I guess that comes back to honesty, right?
Players like I would be more concerned if a player didn't have that mindset, that they didn't think they can make the shot. Okay, you can make the shot, I know, but we can't do it every time. And that's where a little bit of discernment comes into play. You have to pick and choose when. Does the scenario or the situation lend itself to you taking that shot? Right. And that just comes from learning, experience. It just takes time. But I think players, at least I think most players are really well intentioned. Like they're trying to do the right things. They're trying to play the game the right way. It's our job to guide them along. But you don't want to constrict them to the point where they're just thinking way too much and then they're overlooking to the sideline. Was that right? Was that okay? Oh man, just it's all right. Just go play. That's one of the things that I really appreciate about Will and that I've learned from him is that he does such a good job of letting players play the game. Players are going to take a bad shot. It's part of the game. We've all done it in our life. Like you take bad shots. It's part of the game. Okay, get back on defense and then we'll figure it out later. He does such a good job of just giving guys the freedom to do that, to play the game, and not have to look over their shoulder if they did something a little bit squirrely. Right? Players know when they took a bad shot. I guess you all know. Okay, keep playing. If it keeps happening over and over again, we can address it. But a lot of times it's a one-off. It's part of the game. You got to create space for those things to happen.
Great insight in terms of modern coaching and really, again, trusting your players and empowering them. I'm curious, I don't know if this applies to stuff you've done, but the concept of decision fatigue, which is a real thing, is that one of the potential downfalls for certain players, especially maybe early in the process of learning this, is there's too many decisions. Is there ever a time to limit them to certain things or a few things so that they don't have this decision fatigue come up?
Yeah, I think when you're first introducing some of these concepts, you should really start with maybe just one thing, right? So I would start with the thing that fits your personnel the best. If you have good pick and roll players and good drivers, maybe I would start with small pick and roll and how to find some of these actions. Okay. And then you teach just a few things. Maybe you just teach sprint slip and you teach hit under. And then we just ride with that for whatever period of time. Maybe it's a week, maybe it's a month, maybe it's a month and a half. And then once you feel like the players have a good grasp of that, then you can expand it to off ball. Okay. Maybe not doing pin downs and flares, but we just do pin downs. And I think you can introduce it piece by piece instead of just giving them everything at one point, because I think that's a recipe for disaster. But there's also space where like you let the players figure it out. And sometimes they just do stuff on their own that works that you never even said. Like, for instance, I remember there's a couple times during our season last year where maybe there's a cutter and the guys in the ball is kind of driving, or the guy with the ball is driving it. And the cutter, instead of just getting back out to open space, the guy in the corner like screens in for the guy who cut, and then that guy's coming to the corner for a wide open shot, right? And you may not necessarily teach that, but the guys just they just do it, right? Like you don't have to over teach every little thing. And I think it's better for the players too, because then they have the freedom to explore and be creative. I think it's really cool when players talk amongst themselves during the game, saying, "Hey, if this happens, we can do this or we can do that." It doesn't always have to be something prescribed from the coach. Sometimes it does. I understand that. But also giving the players some agency and some ownership over how they play the game can really go a long way.
That's such a great point. And I can definitely think of those situations where, especially working with some clients in college the last few years, where I'm trying to encourage them not to name everything. Not everything needs a name. It's just sometimes let them be and let them figure it out. And that is an awesome example of that right there. Curious if you can connect just as we start to wrap up here, maybe some of the analytics behind this, maybe particularly starting with rebounding. So if we're in these later clock situations, does that influence offensive rebounding in some positive or negative way with analytics? And then maybe are there any other analytics that kind of influence these after actions?
Yeah, I think from an analytics perspective, you kind of have to know the numbers for your or the data for your own team first.
Right.
To develop some type of system for after action, you have to really know if your team is good or not in pick and roll. Are they good or not in off ball, right? Because if our team is, according to the data, right, if our team has, let's say it's 1.2 points per possession on off ball actions, and we're 0.84 points per possession on some type of small ball pick and roll, then it probably makes more sense for us to do off ball, not pick and roll, right? Now, I don't know. It's actually a really good question. I don't know exactly if later in the clock helps the offensive rebounding. However, I do think, again, the more movement and the quicker decisions that you make, the less the defense is aware, which opens up opportunities to crash. Obviously, like everybody has their crash rules. But if you're in the corner, obviously, and you're not shooting it, you're definitely going, right? And that's actually, Chris, actually, thank you for bringing that up. I have to do some research on that.
Yeah,
I
I'm
do
just
know
sometimes when you talk, it brings up curious questions in my mind. I don't necessarily have the answer and have never even thought of the question until you started talking. So it's beautiful. That's why we do this podcast, Mike. Just tremendous.
of course. The other thing with the analytics piece is that usually in transition, you have a higher chance of scoring than in a half court possession. You're playing against a non-set defense and guys are scrambling around. And I think when we push in transition and you don't have something immediately off the back, getting to that next after action is another way to continue to raise your chances of being able to score. The whole reason why transition possessions are higher points per possession than half court is usually because the defense just isn't set, right? So if we can continue to maintain that advantage where they're not set and not exactly understanding what's going on and what's happening around them, then also I think the after action, if it's done quickly, can continue that kind of transition look where maybe you have a higher chance of scoring than if the defense is just set and in a standard position.
Love that. Love that. And you said something at the beginning, Mike, which I think is tremendous. And by the way, your knowledge and your sharing has been awesome. It's just so much value that you've added in these areas. You said you went into coaching not thinking about being a head coach. One, I'm curious if that's changed a little bit as you've had the head coaching experience. And then two, just that approach in general. I think that's such an awesome way to be able to approach it as a young person in coaching, to have that humility and understanding that I'm where I'm at and I'm truly here because I'm not going to think about that yet. But when the possibility comes, you said yes. And of course, you had that experience. So talk to
Yeah.
us about that whole aspect of your career development.
Yeah. My start in basketball was as a student manager. I was just happy to be around the team and I continued to learn and grow. And I figured out that I wanted to coach. And then I got a player development and a video job with the Wizards and the same thing, just happy to be there. And then I'm really fortunate and grateful for people like Amber Nichols and Tommy Shepard who put that battery in my back to be a head coach in the G League. And it opened up my eyes a little bit and opened up my horizon. And now, of course, like if the opportunity were to arise, I would love to be a head coach. But I'm really happy that it worked out the way it did because I wasn't striving for somebody else's job or trying to fall over people. I was just trying to do good work. And I think that continues to today. You have a quality of work that you want to do. You want to help the people around you. And then wherever the chips fall, that's where they fall.
I love that. Such a wonderful approach. And Mike, again, I can't thank you enough for sharing the game with us. Just tremendous stuff and tremendous knowledge. And we appreciate this and we look forward to following the rest of your coaching journey.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.